Orthodoxy for me can be demonstrated by a triangle. Imagine a triangle with equal sides, like this. And at the angles of this triangle is God and human beings on the horizontal side of the triangle. So this triangle represents three kinds of word. The first kind of word is the word which is addressed by God to human beings. It comes from top, from where God is, to the human beings, this side of the triangle. So this is the revelation of God. This is the truth which God reveals to human beings in order to save them. Another side of the triangle goes from bottom to up, from human beings to God. This is a kind of word which human beings address or return to God in response to His revelation. This kind of word we hear here in the liturgy. This is the liturgical word. This is the word of prayer. This is the word of worship, of praise to God, doxology. And finally, the bottom line of the triangle, the third kind of word, is the theological word. This is a kind of word that the human beings exchange with one another in response to what they've received from God as revelation. They exchange their experience of God. They communicate to one another what they think, what they feel, what they've experienced about God. So this is the kind of theological side of the triangle, the theological word. It should not be confused with the revelation as such, which comes from God, and it should not be confused with the praise that goes up to God from human beings. So orthodoxy, in my judgment, applies to all three sides of this triangle. It embodies the fullness of the revelation of God, the fullness of the Word of God, who became a human being in order to reveal to us the Father, to make us one with the Father, to reunite us, to restore the relationship that the human beings had in the paradise before the fall, and to not just to restore this relationship, but to enrich it with what we call theosis, deification of human beings. So this side of the triangle, the Word of God, is fully embedded in Orthodoxy. Orthodoxy is also about the glorification of God, about praising God. It's about liturgy, about prayer, and it should be also Orthodox. And prayer, liturgical life constitute a very important part, an intrinsic part of the Orthodox tradition of our Orthodoxy. So you cannot remove this side from Orthodoxy, the liturgical, the prayerful, the worshipping side. And finally, what is also important is this horizontal side of the triangle, which represents the human word about God directed to other human beings, the theological word. This is probably the most complicated kind of word. And indeed, in the history of our church, there were many instances when this word was distorted, and that's how heresies emerged, and that's how people communicated sometimes wrong ideas to each other about God. I believe that as a result of those discussions that we had in the past, especially in the first centuries of Christianity, our church eventually came up with very profound and very true formulations about who is God, how He's related to human beings, how human beings are related to each other. So those ideas are orthodox, they are true, they truly represent the revelation of God, and they are truly reflected in the prayer and worship that we have in our church. Um, at the same time, it's an interesting side. There is an interesting side to this horizontal dimension of the Word of God, the theological word. It has to do with the way how we treat it, how we treat the theological word, how we perceive and how we replicate this word. I would exemplify two basic approaches to the Word of God and to the human word about God communicated to other human beings as a bookshelf. Imagine a bookshelf, just like this one, just next to me. So this bookshelf is filled with books, with the word that human beings exchanged in order to explain to each other what they know, what they understand, what they feel about God. Those books have been written by the fathers of the church, sometimes inspired by the mothers of the church. If you take, for instance, a wonderful treatise by Gregory of Nyssa about the soul and resurrection, he presents this his conversation. It contains a conversation of Gregory with his sister Macrina, and Gregory actually reflects the wisdom of Macrina. So we can say that this wisdom, the patristic wisdom, also includes the mothers of the church. So this wisdom has been recorded in the books, in those many books that we keep on our on this imagined bookshelf of our orthodoxy. And we can deal with those books in two ways. We can take a book from the shelf and then put it to another shelf in the same bookcase. We can just remove or replace one book with another one. We could relocate those books without really looking into them, without reading them. This is an approach to orthodoxy which can be called traditionalist, which is a bit of distortion of what is tradition. It's an approach that sometimes takes the word of the fathers literally without really giving thought to them. Sometimes even mechanically. It's just like a mechanical either commemoration of the word of the fathers, jungling with the word of the fathers, without really getting into the sense, what the Greeks call the phronema, the understanding, the perception of the fathers' thought. A much more helpful and orthodox, I believe, approach to the patristic legacy, to the fathers and mothers of the church, is when you approach this bookshelf, this imagined bookshelf. You take a book from it, you open it, and you read it carefully, thoughtfully. You just try to grasp what the author of the book tried to communicate. Remember this horizontal line of the human word about God, what kind of word it is, what they wanted to tell us. And after you commemorate it, after you get into it, after you understand it, comprehend it, you may even write your own book. You certainly may keep your notes and to rephrase what you've read in your own words. In order to continue this tradition of communicating the Word of God to other human beings, in order to keeping drawing the same horizontal line that reflects both the revelation and is reflected in the worship of the church. This approach is much more helpful, as I said. It is really indeed a creative approach to orthodoxy. And I believe that creativity is at the core of our Orthodox tradition. Orthodoxy is not about mechanical replication of someone else's thoughts. It's not about taking a book from a bookshelf and placing it elsewhere on a different bookshelf. It's about reading, digesting, sometimes devouring the wisdom of the fathers and mothers of the church in order to make it comprehensible for myself first and then for others. That is the purpose of orthodoxy. It's about communicating the word of God, the revelation that we receive to other human beings, to our fellows. It's about the missionary effort of disseminating the word of God to others. And you cannot do this if you don't get the wisdom of the fathers in a creative way. So creativity, open-mindedness is very much at the core of the Orthodox tradition. Being creative also means that I open up my mind to the wisdom of the fathers. I don't construct my own ideas about the fathers. I don't extrapolate my own ideas upon the fathers, but I absorb the wisdom of the fathers. I allow this wisdom to shape myself, to shape my understanding of what is the church, what is God, what is human being in the church and in this world. And after having been shaped in this way of the patristic wisdom, I reproduce this wisdom in my own words, in the way that could be comprehensible by my friends, people in my environment, people next to me, my neighbor, essentially. You cannot do this if you don't open your mind to the wisdom of the fathers, if you don't deal with it in a creative way, and if you don't reproduce it in this creative way. Therefore, what is not orthodox, what is contrary to orthodox, is this mechanical reproduction of the wisdom without really penetrating into it, and without allowing this wisdom to penetrate into my mind, my heart, my soul. It's about also extrapolation of my ideas upon the fathers, upon the church. When I create the fathers of the church in my own image and likeness, in the image and likeness of my mind, which is not perfect. Sometimes it is obscured, it is corrupted, it is wrong. And I can believe that I firmly reproduce the teaching of the fathers, but in fact I just mechanically jungle with quotes. I just put my personal beliefs, sometimes quite often rather wrong beliefs, as present them as the teaching of the fathers, and try to convince others that my wrong ideas are the ideas of the fathers. This can be avoided if I really open myself to the patristic wisdom, if I try to relate myself, to make myself, to reshape myself in accordance with the wisdom of the fathers, and then to, in a creative way, to share it with others. Those are the requirements of the true orthodoxy, I believe, and that is the way how the ancient fathers acted and worked. That is the way how such authorities of the past, like St. Athanasius of Alexandria, St. Cyril of Alexandria, the Cappadocian fathers, St. Ephraim of Syria, Maximus the Confessor, and other fathers treated their own predecessors. They appropriated the wisdom, and then in a very creative way replicated this wisdom for us and for other people. So let us imitate those great minds and souls in our tradition, and that's how we will continue this tradition of orthodoxy, something that we are called for.